Hello YouTube, this is Umos03. In the previous video, we learned about a new type of loop, and we said 2 videos ago that we could use a while loop to iterate through code and print multiple numbers, or basically iterate through a list, and we could use that for helpful purposes. Maybe we could print one letter of a string at a time, one on each line. And then we said, well, we could also come up with a for loop. Basically, a for loop in Python is a little bit more concise. And so we tried different examples of that. And we're just going to pick up from where we left off. So I wanted to go ahead and review some for loop architecture and talk a little bit more about the range command. And then we're going to talk about 2 important statements, 2 important keywords in Python called break and continue. Okay, so I guess the framework would be to, we could go ahead and review while loops until 4 minutes. And then you could go ahead and review for loops until 7 minutes or something, and then we could do range until 12, and then we want 4 minutes for break, and then 4 minutes for continue or something like that. So basically, we remember with while loops that if we say t equals 100, and then while t is less than 125, we could say print of t, and we don't have to go up by an integer every time. So what if we wanted to go up by 8.5? So basically this would start at 100, and then it would say, is 100 less than 125? Yes, so print 100 and then increment 100 by 8.5. And then the integer would become a float. So I think we saw an example where the only time the variable that was coming into the while loop was an integer was the first time it was coming in. And then once you slap a float onto it, we said that Python implicitly casts, it automatically converts it into a float. So now if you go ahead and run the main method, these are the only 3 values of t where t is less than 125, where it's at least 100, and where it's going up by 8.5 every time, right? Because you go up by 8.5 one more time and it would be 125.5. What if you had said 127 here? Well, then the 125.5 would fit, and so that would be that last number that you go ahead and print there. So that's pretty clear. And then we said that we can also use a while loop to iterate through a list, and then we can do multiplication and division too. So what if you said t equals 60 while t is less than 10? You could say print of t, and then you could say t divided by equals 2. Okay, what if you wanted to do an integer-based division? So you could say t equals t over and over 2. Remember, that's a type of integer division, and then it would do 60, 30, 15. So remember, this is an integer-based division. So what would be 15 over 2? What if we go one more step, right? What if we said while t is greater than 5? It would take it one more step. It would do one more division, right? And 15 divided by 2 is 7, because according to this operator, an integer divided by an integer is another integer. So hopefully that reviews a couple of the concepts, and we can also iterate through a list. So we could say 3, true, hey, what if we want to have a list within it? So we could say 802, and then we could say, 3 sup, and then we could go ahead and say 1.1, 1.4, and done, or something like that. And then what you could do is you could say, t equals 0, and then while t is less than the length of the list, right? And then you could say print of t, and then go ahead, don't forget to increment t by 1, and then you would go ahead and increment s of t, right? I was printing just the values of t, but you would have to use the values of t as index positions into s. So you'd say s of t, right? And then you would go ahead and get all those 3 things, right? And you can see that some of the elements are lists in and of themselves, right? What if you had started at t equals 2? Then you would get something a little different. Then you'd be starting at hey, right? So then if you go ahead and run this, then it would start at hey here. So you can see just those last few elements. What if you had said t is less than or equal to the length of s? So are you allowed to plug the length of s into an index? Is the length of s an index position of s? No. We said that the index positions of s start at 0 and go up to the length of s minus 1. So the index position of done here is the length of s minus 1. It would be, like 5, I think, or whatever it is. But here, if you go ahead and run it, then it would basically have an error. So it would say list index out of range, okay? And so this would be a problem, okay? That's basically called an exception, okay? It's called an error in Python code. So hopefully you understand what's going on with that. Let's talk about for loops. So we said that we could replace this architecture and we could do something easier. So we could say for element in S, we could just say print of element. And this would be a really easy way to just access each of the elements in the list. And then if we go ahead and run it, there's no more runtime error. We just print all the elements that we had in this list. And this is a really convenient way for just accessing things, right? You could also do a for loop with letters, because you have to remember, always remember, a string is a list of characters. Really, that's just the formulation you have to make. So what if we go ahead and say x is equal to watermelon, okay? And then we want to reference the letters in x. So what we could do is we could say for y in x, print of y. And so that would go ahead and print each of the letters on a different line. So basically this would be equivalent to, z equals 0, while z is less than length of x, print, and then it would be basically x of z, okay? And then increment z. So, for loop is simpler architecture. You can see it's just a little bit more compact, and it's just a pretty simple way of doing things, right? WATERMELON. That's not too bad, right? So hopefully you can understand what's going on with that. And then, yeah, so that's essentially what we have going on with that. So I guess that would be iterating through a string, and then we talked about how you would iterate through a list with the for. So those are, and then those are basically the uses of the for loop until you start talking about range. Okay, so we're basically going to bring up range here, but hopefully you get the idea, right? So you say 3, t equals 3, 2, 9, 1, sup, down. What if you wanted to basically iterate? What if you wanted to basically iterate? You want to go up the list. So what if you want to iterate the reverse of the elements in T? Okay, so you want to, so the goal is to print down, then sup, then 1, 9, then 2, and then 3. Okay, so there's two methods. Basically, the first approach is method 1, is you could use a while loop, basically, and you would say x is equal to, so you would say, here's what you would do. So you would say x is equal to, it would be the length of t minus 1, because this is the largest valid index position. And then what you would do is you would say while x is greater than 0, okay? Or you'd have to say x is greater than or equal to 0, because x equals 0 is a valid index position. So you need to include x equals 0 in order to get the 3 at the beginning of t, okay? So that at the beginning of the list. So now what you're going to do is you could say print t of x, and then you would basically go down by 1. You would decrement. So this would be one of the ways where you could print the elements of the list in reverse order. So it'd say down sup 1, 9, 2, 3, just as we wanted. The second option that you have is you can basically say t dot reverse. So remember, this would basically reformulate t into a list with the elements of t reversed. So now what you could do is remember that the while loop that we just wrote, affects the way things were printed, but it didn't affect the ordering of elements in t, right? T is still these elements, right? If you say t of 0, it's still 3. If you say t of 2, it's still 9. The elements haven't changed. We just basically affected the way that we were printing them. We're going to, in the while loop, we said, oh, print the last element, and then print the next to last, and then print the one before that. So then the other thing you could have just said is, t dot reverse. And we saw an example of that earlier. And then what you could say is you could say for y and t, you could say print of y. Okay, and so this would be basically a way to iterate through the elements in the list backwards using a for loop, is you just flip the order of them, and then you can go ahead and print them. So now if we go ahead and remove the while loop and then we go ahead and run it, we should get the exact same output, down sup 1, 9, 2, 3. We can also talk about range, right? So we basically said, if you say range of x, you say basically for x in, let's say for x in range of y, this would be that x, basically the for loop iterates with x equals 0, x equals 1, x equals 2, all the way up to x equals y minus 1. If you say for x in range of y and z, the for loop will iterate with x equals y plus 1, x equals y plus 2, all the way up to x equals z minus 1, okay? So the assumption here is that z is larger than y, okay? And then essentially what you would have here is you would say here, then basically you would say for x in range of, oh, I guess I ran out of variables here, but if you say, for example, w, y, and z, what this would do is the for loop, the for loop iterates starting at x equals w, and then it would go x equals w plus z, and then it would go x equals w plus 2 times z, and then x equals w plus 3 times z until it gets up until x is no longer less than y. Okay, so basically in the third version, z is the increment from w to y. Okay, and x equals y is not included. So remember, we do not include the rightmost endpoint. We start at the, basically the first parameter, the starting point, and then but the boolean that it's checking is less than, not less than or equal to. So that's a lot of text right there. Let's see a couple of examples of what we were talking about, right? So if we say for x in range of 4, we could say print of x, right? And then that would go ahead and we could run it, and then we would get 0, 1, 2, 3. What if we had said in range of 45 and 52? Then this would go ahead and start at 45, and it would count up by 1 every time. Using the boolean, this is equivalent to if we had said y equals 45 while y is less than 52, print of y, and then y plus equals 1. But then what we're going to do is we're going to stick in an extra argument here. So then if we do a 2 here, by default, there is a 1 after the 52. Okay, so then if you have a, unless you replace it with something else. So now if you go ahead and have a 2 there, then you would count up by 2. So you would say 47, 40, 45, 47, 49, 51. So then if you go ahead and run it, we can remove this while loop here. I was just showing you what the for loop is equivalent to, but this would be 47, 40, 45, 47, 49, 51. What if you had made this 53 here, right here? So then 51 plus 2 is 53. But would 53 be included? No, it would not be included because we said it stops right before that. What if you had said 53.1 here? Then do you get the 53? Yes, because it starts at 45, goes up by 2 every time until it's no longer less than 53.1. Actually, you cannot put an integer there, so it would have to be an integer if this counter is an integer. So hopefully that makes sense to you. And then you could also go down. So we're kind of taking a little bit too much time here, but we could also go down. So you could say 45, 33, and -2, but here it would not print 33 because here the corresponding Boolean or greater than, not greater than or equal to. So hopefully that all makes sense to you, and we really got to move on and talk about break and continue. So break, so if during a while loop or for loop, the code reaches a break, all operation of that loop terminates immediately. Okay, so we immediately stop all activity in the loop and go down to the code underneath it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If we have a continue, if this occurs during a while or for loop, basically the current iteration of the loop ends, but the Boolean that the loop is looking at continues. So basically the next iteration proceeds. The next iteration proceeds as long as the Boolean in question is true. So here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to basically say y equals 0. And then we're going to say while y is bigger than -2, we're going to say print of y. And then we're going to say y plus equals 1. What you might be able to recognize is there's a big problem with this code. If you start out at y equals 0, 0 is bigger than -2. So you would print y, and then here we would increment y. So we would take y from 0 to 1. But 1's even bigger than -2, right? And so you can see a problem with this code. And I can actually go ahead and run it for you. We're going to remove some of the range stuff. So hopefully, what we were talking about up here is makes sense to you and is clear enough. But we're going to remove that. What happens if we run this code? There's going to be a big issue here, right? It's printing 70,000 and whatnot. So I actually need to stop the execution. So I'm just going to go up to the top right here. I don't know if you guys can see, but this is a helpful shortcut. If you want to run a code, we'll run a Python file. You can either go up to the run here and press run main, or you could, or you can go ahead and press the green triangle here. But you can also go ahead and basically press the stop button here. So if your program's running, then the stop button will be red. But anyway, we had to use that because this program is going to blow up. So here's what we're going to do. What we're going to do is insert a Boolean into the while loop. And what this Boolean is going to do is it's going to be an if statement that checks to see if something is true. And it's going to check to see if that thing is true every time we enter the while loop again, because this while loop seems like it's going to be true forever and ever, right? Given the way it currently is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if at any point y makes it to 10, I'm going to have you break out of the loop. So what this is going to do is it's going to basically evaluate this Boolean. And we said that the way that an if statement works is the code within the if statement runs if and only if this Boolean is true. This is just a simple if statement. So that means that basically once, if at any point y equals 10, we basically hop out of the loop and are done with it forever. Okay, and so basically you would go ahead and increment y, and this Boolean will be true forever. The only problem is that now if y gets to 10, which is greater than -2, so y equals 10 is fine, but then you enter the loop and then it says if y equals 10, you break out. So would you print 10? No. Would you increment y by 1? No. Would you look at the loop again? No, you would be done with it. So now if we go ahead and run it, you just get 0 to 9 because we had this condition that as you're going through the loop, within the loop, you need to check a Boolean. So you can see the difference, right? This is a Boolean that is checked before the next iteration could possibly begin, okay? And so break would be a Boolean that is checked within an iteration, okay? If true, the loop is terminated. The loop is terminated. And you could do something else before a break. So if you wanted to print that last y, what would you do? If you wanted to print 10, you could say, okay, if y makes it to 10, go ahead and print that last value, and then I don't want to see any more activity. So it would go ahead and say print 10, and then it would be done. So now you go ahead and get 0 all the way up to 10. So hopefully that makes sense too. Hopefully that's clear with what's going on. It would be the same thing as if you said while true here, right? So hopefully that makes sense too with what's going on. We can also talk about a continue statement. So if a continue occurs, basically what happens is it stops reading the code for the rest of the loop body, but only for that iteration. And then it'll basically proceed to the next iteration. So let me show you what I mean by that. What we're gonna do is here the goal is gonna be to print the even numbers x such that x equals 20, or x, is greater than 0, x equals 0, starting, and x is less than or equal to 20. Okay, so the method 1 is you use a loop, right? So then I guess 1a is you could say, z equals 0, while z is less than or equal to 20, you could say print of z and then z plus equals 2. That would just be an ordinary while loop. You could also say something like, for z, you would say range of 0, you'd have to say 22 basically, right? Because you would have to include 20, and we said that it cuts off before that last point. Or you could say 21 or something like that, but it has to be 21 or 22, I think. And then you would just say print of z, right? And so that's a pretty simple while loop. So this would be a simple for loop. This would be a simple while loop. The other thing that we can do is we can basically prevent a number from being printed if the number is odd. So let's go ahead and think about how we would do that. What we're going to do is we're going to say r equals 0. While r is less than or equal to 20, what we're going to do is we're going to have a condition that checks to see whether the remainder, if we divide r by 2, is equal to 0 or not. Basically, we need to check to see if a number is even. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if r mod 2 is not equal to 0. So you could say if not r mod 2 is equal to 0, basically we're going to continue. Okay, so basically if we are dealing with a value of r right now that is not even, okay, so if this would be r equals 1, r equals 1, 3, r equals 5 would satisfy the Boolean. Okay, so for those values of the Boolean, since you have the not here, it would be true, and then you would continue. So basically this would mean don't finish the current iteration of the code. Okay, so but what you would have to do is you would have to increment r by 1 before that so that it could look at the next value. But then down here, you would go ahead and say print of r, okay? And then if you do print that value, then you would want to increment it, okay? So you're going to have to increment it regardless of whether it's an odd value, right? So if it's an odd value, it's going to increment to the next even, but it would continue and not print the odd. If it's an even value, you would skip this if block, and you would print the even number, and then you would increment to run it for the odd number, but then the odd number would continue, and you would just print the next even. So that has the exact same effect as if you had used one of these more, ordinary approaches. So hopefully that's interesting, and we're going to review that in the next video. From UMills 03, thanks for watching, and please subscribe.